Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations, where we talk about adversity, mental health, spirituality, and societal issues. I'm your host, Natashia. In this week's episode, I am honored to welcome back Dr. Natashia Robbins. Natashia is a licensed marriage and family therapist and coach. She obtained her master's and PhD from Purdue University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Michigan Medical Center. Natashia's research and clinical experience over 16 years has centered around attachment and nervous system regulation. In recent years, her focus has broadened to include somatic attachment therapy and internal family systems frameworks. She's also a trained yoga instructor and breathwork facilitator. Natashia owns a private practice where she provides therapy and coaching services for clients in office and virtually online. In this episode, Natashia and I discuss attachment styles. We discuss the attachment styles most people are familiar with and explore the research that led to secure and insecure attachment development. Natashia and I also talk about how people can build secure attachments in their lives, and we share our own experiences of how we've been able to do that. You can find Natashia on social media and online. Her Instagram handles are at The Rooted Revolution and at Rooted and Guided. Her website is www.rootedwellnesstherapy.com, or her coaching website is www.therootedrevolution.com. Please find all other ways to get a hold of Natashia in the show notes, and please leave a review at the end of this episode. I would truly appreciate it.
All right, Natashia, welcome back to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me once again. I really enjoyed our first episode together. It was very powerful, very inspiring for me. So I'm excited for another conversation with you. And this time we'll take a different angle, but perhaps somewhat linked to our first episode together. And before we get started, I still want to give you an opportunity, perhaps to introduce yourself for listeners that maybe haven't heard our first episode together.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me back. I had so much fun the last time. And I feel like we could have talked for hours. So I feel like it's so good to be able to continue the conversation. And hopefully it taps into, some of your listeners and what they're interested in, because I think we're going to cover a lot of ground today.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really excited for sure. And it's definitely an area I haven't covered yet on the podcast, but it's very much relevant when you think about it in terms of how attachment styles show up in all areas of our life. And when I was working on a couple of papers last year, I came across research that even suggested if we don't have secure attachment styles, that can also lead to poor emotional coping and can lead to some other forms of anxiety at times because we don't have those secure attachment styles that we can fall back on. So there's a lot of that comes up and can
Yeah.
impact our temperament. But yeah, I want to turn it over to you and perhaps you
Yeah.
talk about your background and the work you do and why you be the person to share some knowledge on attachment styles.
Oh my gosh. I hope there's so many great attachment oriented people. So I am humbled to be like representing, that community.
Yeah.
It's been a passion of mine since I took a class in grad school on attachment theory.
Mhm.
And I ended up making the professor of that class a part of my dissertation committee and my master's thesis committee because I was like, this is it. Like, I was just like, you know how when you have that moment where you're just lit up? I was so lit up. And it has stayed like this lit up feeling whenever I talk about attachment has never faded, and this was so long ago. So now I'll speak from the present day, and then I'll kind of walk back a
Sure.
little bit how I stumbled on it. But right now, I'm a therapist and coach. I'm a marriage and family therapist by training. I work with a lot of people who experience symptoms of depression and anxiety. I work with a lot with grief lately,
Mhm.
and we talked a little bit about grief last time, and that's become an area that um, has been especially interesting and exciting for me to dip my toe in. But every area that I've worked with in the past and in the present has been through this attachment lens, no matter what topic I'm talking about. It is through this attachment lens. And if I rewind back, when I did my master's thesis, it was on adolescents. The population was incarcerated as adolescent males. I gathered data from that population, and I was interested in exploring attachment, attachment and emotion regulation as constructs in terms of predicting conduct disorder. So I wanted to understand like what's the role of their attachment style and how does it like interact with, if at all, um, what I was calling emotion regulation at the time.
Mhm.
And when those come together, like how does it play out in terms of their behavior choices? So I entered this field with an interest in adolescence, and I'm mentioning that because it's evolved a lot since then. I'm still interested in adolescence, but that was my entry point.
Right.
And we were talking a little bit before starting recording just now, and you were talking about in your research for a paper how you found that attachment is connected with choices and behavior and stuff, and that's exactly what I was in. Like, why are these kids here? Like,
Yeah.
why are they incarcerated? Like, what went wrong? And being really interested in the parent child relationship that this emerged out of.
Right.
So, then for my dissertation and then my postdoctoral research, I got more and more interested in younger kids. So like, um, you know, childhood age, and then my postdoctoral research was mom baby infant attachment. And it was literally collecting data from moms who just had their babies and then following them for a while.
Right.
I was recruiting them from the hospital, like, right after delivering their baby. So I started to get more and more interested in, like, "No, let's go further in the past, further in the past, further in the past. Where did this start?"
Mhm.
And, so this is a little bit of a setup to talk about Mary Ainsworth's research, and you probably have heard about it, especially the strange situation. So there
Mhm.
is a research study. It's a controlled observational study of moms and their children, where the researchers were behind a one-way mirror, and they're essentially watching the mom baby interactions on the other side in a playroom.
Mhm.
And through a series of separations and reunions. So what I mean by that is the mom and baby are first playing or, in their room, the child has an opportunity to explore.
Right.
And initially the mom's just observing. Then they engage them in a little bit of play. And after a while, a stranger enters. So this
Mhm.
is why it's called a strange situation. Because for a kid, this would be weird, be strange
Right.
to them. It's meant to elicit mild stress. So that's what you want when you're looking at attachment. Like our attachment responses show up for us when we're stressed out.
Mhm.
Like, so that's what they wanted to elicit. And that's what the stranger entering was meant to elicit is this mild stressor that they can observe the cascade of responses afterward.
Right.
Well, the stranger enters, and there's multiple steps, but the gist of the steps is that the stranger enters, the mom leaves. So the
Mhm.
stranger's with the kid, and they're playing, and the stranger's sort of following the kid's lead. Then the mom returns, the stranger leaves. So there's this sequence of like separations and reunions that are happening in the context of the stranger coming and
Right.
going as well.
Yeah.
So you can see how for a kid, this would be just the right kind of scenario to elicit a stress response. So thinking about like the nervous system activation is kicking
Mhm.
in. And what the researchers wanted to observe is a lot of things, but especially like, what is that kid doing when, as they are stressed out? How does it impact their play? Um, when the mom returns, how do they use the mom as a secure base?
Right.
to self-soothe and to get back to baseline in their nervous system. How effective is the mom in doing that with them? How attuned is the mom to the child's cues? Or, are they unable to attune and be responsive in an effective way to the child's cues? So it's sort of like, what's this dyadic dance look like?
Hmm.
What they were able to do with their research that was all like video, like recorded and then coded for these
Hmm.
behaviors, things they were looking for, is essentially create categories of child attachment behaviors.
Right.
One, so we were talking about like attachment categories before we started recording, and how I was expressing a frustration that the
Yeah.
attachment categories have shifted a lot. So, like, before Ainsworth, she was really influenced by a researcher named John Bowlby, and he really thought attachment was attached or not. So
Mm.
that was, she wanted to see, like, is that it? Is that what we're looking at here? Or is there more to the story? Is
Hmm.
it that we have attached versus non-attached kids, or is there more nuance? So
Right.
initially, she was finding there was this um, secure, resistant, avoidant. Um, 3 categories, and the way that I would describe secure is essentially the mom and baby are able to use one another effectively.
Hmm.
So, mom the mom's able to read the cues, be responsive to those cues in ways that are uniquely helpful to their kid because they know their kid.
Yeah.
Um, child's able to use the mom and, like, seeks her out upon reunion, um, doesn't push her away,
Mm.
prefers her over the stranger. So there's all these sort of like elements to secure attachment that are really what you want to see.
Mm.
And behaviorally, these kids are able to uh, soothe more quickly. They're able to explore more readily.
Yeah.
Once with mom in the room, they're able to explore more freely. With the stranger in the room, they sort of stop their exploration. So there's these really predictable patterns that feel healthy.
Hmm.
The category of what she was calling at the time resistant, and what now I would probably say is more like anxious.
Yeah.
They didn't do that the same way. They sought out their mom, but they were sort of like pushing, they were sort of like inconsolable or not quite satisfied with the comfort that the mom was able to provide,
Right.
pushing away a little bit. Took longer to soothe. There was more of that anxious energy. I think the pushing away is where the resistant came from.
Right. And
Um,
probably also a lack of trust and safety, right? That's coming up
mhm.
for the child as well.
And a lot of this like anxious seeking, but also not feeling like what they're getting is effectively
Hmm.
helping them. And then in the third category is this sort of like, I can kind of take mom or leave her. I don't really feel all that distressed when she's gone. I'm just as happy with the stranger. The stranger suits me just as much as mom does. In other words, and this is what you know, still remains these categories. What I want to emphasize is even though that some of the names have changed and it's gotten really complicated, sometimes with lots of different categories and then got really simplified again, is that these 3 main categories, even though they may be named different things, have stuck.
Yeah.
So um, so that what we now call like avoidant is this stance of when I feel nervous system dysregulation, I rather pull away.
Hmm.
I've learned that I can't trust that people will be there for me. I've learned that I'm better off figuring this out on my own. I can sort of take you or leave you. It is this sort of like distant energy
Hmm.
where what I would now call like anxious attachment, if we just want to keep it simple, it is this sort of like the person who, when they're dysregulated, remember both groups are dysregulated. They're both anxious, they're both insecure categories of attachment.
Right.
It's what they're doing about that is different. One is sort
Hmm.
of distancing and acting as though we don't need people, right? And the other is sort of anxiously seeking. So this is that would be as an adult, this would be the person who's like anxiously texting. Are you there? Why haven't you
Yeah.
replied? Why haven't you replied? It's this lack of security inwardly
Mm.
that is testing with a lot of anxious checking and chasing that doesn't feel soothing. So that's the key of it is that like even with both insecure categories, the outcome of what the person is doing is not getting them the result that they're looking for. It's not
Mhm.
resulting in this sense like grounded, secure, connected energy that we want to be having.
Yeah.
And then secure people, that's the category where they actually can use their relationships with other people to help them self soothe pretty easily without chasing, without a lot of anxious pursuit or distancing. So
Mhm.
it's like open, grounded trust that people have. I want to pause there and just make sure you don't have any questions and like check in because I feel like I've covered a lot with like the research part and then like trying to boil it down to what we see in
Yeah,
a
no, I appreciate that. Thank you for covering all that, and I love how, the and I agree with you. It's being able to look at it almost as from a perspective of secure versus insecure. And
Mhm.
the other thing I'd like to add that there have been various forms of the strange situation experiment applied and where people were followed into their adult life. And it was
Mhm.
found that a lot of these children, how they responded was predictive of how they would form adult attachment styles. So that's
Yeah,
what's really fascinating about the research around it and why it's so relevant.
yeah,
And the whole notion about the attachment styles we form in childhood are so profound in how they will impact us in our adult lives. And just being aware of that can help you often work through it and recognize why you behave a certain way when you're presented with certain situations in life, especially in terms of your uh well, especially in your romantic relationships, but also in other relationships, right? And you sometimes maintain those dynamics even with your your caregivers.
yeah. You raised a really important point, and when I was just about to dive into a little bit, that's like the why do we care question. Like, why are
Mhm.
we even talking about attachment? And it is
Yeah.
because it's so sticky, it's so salient. So what they found in the longitudinal research following these babies into adulthood is like the categories that they had assigned them to as children were the same categories, even though they might have been named something slightly different with by the time they were adults, as they were when they followed them up years and years and years later at multiple time points.
Mhm.
So that just means that attachment style is very salient. It sticks around unless we do something to really intentionally try and shift it. It will likely not shift. And
Mhm.
this is like I hesitate to even say that because it sounds hopeless, but it's not hopeless because it's difficult to shift, but it is possible to shift. And I want to talk more about that, in the latter part of of our recording today, because I feel like it's super important. What I think people sometimes do is they're like, "What's my style? What's my style? Oh no, I think I'm insecurely attached. I think I'm anxious attached, or I'm." And then they get really this feeling of hopelessness, like,
Mhm.
"Well, this explains why I've always done X, Y, and Z in relationships, and why I've felt unfulfilled." And like, what does that mean for me? Am I broken? Am I like not able to have secure, healthy relationships? And the answer is absolutely no, that's not true. You are able to, and you can heal these.
Mhm.
Or I want to
Yeah,
like leads there.
absolutely, and I appreciate that very much, and I think I'm a huge proponent of agency as well, right? And to your point, you know, for people not to get down that path of feeling hopeless, but I think just having that awareness can bring about a lot of agency and gives you a lot more um, insight into how you can work through some of these things that are salient, as you mentioned. But yeah, let's maybe get into the whole notion of how people, once they become aware, can empower themselves to bring about those changes.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the internal working model, which we talked about last time, um, in the last episode. So if someone hasn't listened to that and we only kind of skimmed it a little bit, I won't spend too much time on it today, but the key to healing it lies in the internal working model. So when you think about why it is that we organize ourselves in these ways with respect to relationships, this is a relationship sort of model. It's
Mhm.
how we interact with people when we are dysregulated. What does that lead us to do in our connections with other people, in our connections with the world, in
Yeah.
our connection with ourselves? So, what I just referenced is the internal working model. In attachment theory, is the sense that all of this is driven by our internal working model, which is formed based on the quality of our early caregiver interaction. And what internal working model means is the sense of security or safety that we feel in ourselves, in relationships, and in the world. The sort of paradigm that we settled on as a kid about how secure and safe those things are, how much I can rely on those things to show up for me, to be available to me, to be helpful to me, all these things. And
Mhm.
so for a secure person, you can see how in those three areas they feel like people really do. They're people want to help me, they're good, they're safe. I'm safe in my body, I'm safe in my connections, the world is safe. In the insecure attachment categories, it is very much a different story, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm not safe in here. I can't really even rely on myself to show up fully for me. I can't rely on you to show up fully for me, and I can't rely on the world. So for an anxious person, an anxiously attached person, it would be, so I have to keep checking and chasing and like pulling you in, chasing success, chasing like really this whole pattern of seeking the solution outside of them. And then for the avoidant category, it'd be the same kind of the same sense of like I can't rely on people,
Right.
but the conclusion being, so I might as well not even bother. It's
Mhm.
this I give up sort of energy, right?
Yeah.
So I want to say that even within the categories, it is not the case that that's what we do all the time. In other words, like even with insecurely attached folks, there is variation. There are times that they act securely. There are times that securely attached folks act insecurely. So this is not like black and white, like off or on categories. This is very much like a dial that sort of shifts over different stages of our lives, over
Mhm.
when certain types of stressors are available or showing up for us, if relationships are hard or strained. So I don't want to give the illusion that any one category is really solid anyway. It is
Right.
very much movable. Um, but the overall category being really salient, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Like
Yeah.
across the board, I tend to be this way. So, in terms of shifting that, given that the internal working model is my internal sense of safety and security in myself, in relationships, and in the world, you can truly see how intervention would be about shifting that sense of security. And what so many people have said, and I do believe this to an extent, is that you can. What I would have originally said is you can only heal attachment in relationships,
Mhm.
in relationship with someone,
Right.
because that's where the attachment pattern was planted
Mhm.
originally. Relationship with your primary attachment figure as a child. A lot of times the mom, but not it could be the dad if
Right.
the mom wasn't available. It's sort of that early attachment figure who was the one who would go to the baby in the crib initially, the one who like there's this primary.
Mhm.
In adulthood, the attachment figure becomes the romantic attachment figure oftentimes,
Mhm.
or if not romantically attached, like the closest friend who's always been there, the one who's like we have this primary person.
Right.
And so what's important to recognize is like that our attachment behaviors are most stimulated by that attachment figure. So if you're in a romantic relationship and you're like, everywhere else in my life, I feel pretty confident, I feel
Yes.
pretty secure. Why is it that in my home, like I feel like so triggered? Like I feel
Right.
so it is because this person who you're living your life with is now in an attachment figure category, and they have the ability to trigger a lot of these behaviors in ways that nothing else can.
Mhm.
But what that also means is that you have the power to heal in that relationship like nothing else can. This has been the story for the longest time, and I'm gonna throw a wrinkle in it in the middle in a little bit.
Yep.
But let's start there that like if you are partnered and you want to heal your attachment paradigm, it's a really great arena to do it because and what I mean by that is like couples work. So
Yeah.
like coming into therapy or coaching environment where you're working on attachment work as a couple so
Mhm.
that you can really talk openly about like what are my fears, what are my old patterns, what are yours, and how are we creating this dance with one another that's really triggering for us, and how can I shift and you shift so that we better meet these needs, and how can we prioritize that work so much because we know that we can heal both of us if
Okay.
we show up for each other consistently, sensitively, in a attuned way, in a committed way. And so for couples who can really do this and like not leave one another, not, so that would trigger a lot of like, I'll never open up to someone again kind
Right.
of thing. So this is very vulnerable, really, for a lot of people, terrifyingly scary work. It's like, but
Right.
what if I do this work and they hurt me again, or they leave me, or they, all these things.
Mhm.
Um, so with a lot of risk comes a lot of reward.
Yeah.
When we're able to show up for each other in that way, we can in relationships show each other that the previous internal working model that we had needs to be updated. That we now have enough evidence because of the relationship with this person and how we've been able to heal to reconfigure what we thought was true in our old attachment, our old internal working model. Like maybe people are safe. Maybe I am safe in my connection with them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Maybe I can rely on myself to really show up fully for me.
Yeah.
Maybe I can go out into the world and explore and be okay. Like these things start to be healed in
Right.
relationship.
Yeah.
So you can absolutely also do the attachment oriented work alone. So I don't want to give that sense, but I want to emphasize how previous researchers and clinicians have really pushed this notion that attachment is healed in relationship. And
Yeah.
so when I'm working with someone one on one, what I'm often having them do is feel out like who are the really safe and secure people in your life? Who do you feel like we can start to have you show up in new ways in your relationship with them and experiment with feel does this feel safe? Do they
Mhm.
respond when I'm honest with them about how I feel? Do they so you can still do this stuff even if you're not partnered, but you
Right.
can see how intense it would be with someone who is now your attachment figure 'cause you're
Mhm.
in a coupled relationship.
Yeah, yeah, and just to kind of build on that too, because, what you're identifying here is this opportunity to heal, and I think behind that opportunity, it's also the idea that we often seek out the relationships that reinforce our earlier attachment styles. So, if
Mhm.
you're having, whether, if you get into that category of anxious attachment style with your caregiver, you will likely seek out a similar type of dynamic in your
Yeah.
romantic relationship, which I think is, as disheartening as it can be for a lot of people, it's a great opportunity to recognize that you're in that situation again. And to your point, it can be considered an additional opportunity to perhaps heal and use that
Yeah.
moment. Yeah.
You your statements are like the perfect segues always. I don't know how you do that because I really wanted to build on what I was talking about, tapping into exactly what you're talking about. So what you just described, like how we sniff out connections that are similar to what we knew growing up, is very purposeful. It is
Hmm.
not an accident. It's not like, wow, how'd that happen? Like, what,
Yeah.
how is it? Not only is my partner one who dances with me in this way, but like a lot of my friends are too. Like, what is it that I surround myself with people who also dance with me in the same way that my earliest caregiver did?
Hmm.
And and so here I wanna get a little bit like mystical. There's something mystical, magical about this that's really like, to me, hardwired into every cell of our body that when we are with someone, in the presence of someone, let's say you're at a club or
Mhm.
you're at a friend's house and there's someone who you're meeting and you're in the presence of someone where you're like, every cell of my body is standing at attention. It's that I feel really compelled to lean in to this connection, right? It's
Yeah.
often because like at a cellular level, very much at a nervous system level as well, there's this sense that like I know, and I don't mean I meaning in our brain like a thought, I mean like in the body, is this sense that so that means it can be a little bit outside of our awareness. I know that I can heal with this person.
Mhm.
And by that I mean like they're similar enough to my original wounding pattern that emerged in childhood that if I re-enter that arena with someone new, this person, for example, I could practice new steps.
Mm.
So if they were too different from the original attachment figure, we wouldn't be able to sort of get this sense of like, let me try that again. Let me see if I can get this right this time. And I don't mean up here, like we're not thinking this cognitively in our brain,
Right.
like at a bodily level. And
Yeah.
I think we pick it up as chemistry. Like the way it feels to us is simply chemistry. But if you were to decipher the chemistry beyond the sexual elements of it, it is the sense that like, wow, this person's energy feels like home to me.
Mhm.
And all the positive and negative aspects of that, all the complicating aspects of that. Meaning, like, I may not know right now, the moment I meet you, that you are likely to be unresponsive to my needs. But there's something about your vibe, the way you carry yourself, that there's something about it that feels really familiar.
Mhm.
Yeah. There's something exciting about that. Like, I know almost like at a soul level that if you and I were to like connect and then engage in the work of healing, both of us,
Yeah.
that I can essentially stitch up my old wounds from childhood with you. And I wouldn't be able to do it with someone who didn't have that like connection
Yeah.
in terms of being similar enough to the previous attachment figure. So when we're with someone who doesn't have that vibe, the way we feel it is like, on paper, they look like they'd be perfect, but I just don't feel it. It's like
Mhm.
that lack of connection that's unexplainable, right?
Right.
So to me, this is like the closest that we get to magic with in our in our lives because there's really no explaining that. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
well,
It's there.
yeah, when you say that, I'm gonna paraphrase this, but something Carl Jung said came up for me. It's whatever we don't heal, we unconsciously repeat.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what I feel happens in that aspect too, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the whole idea of what you referred to earlier, this mystical idea of it, which is pretty fascinating. I can agree with you on that too, that there is something there.
Yeah. It's really fascinating, and it's like we're given the chances over and over again. So, like, let's say the first relationship that's like that, it's too wounding. It's too like, let's say you're thinking about your first high school crush, and it's too intense, or there's too much of this sense inwardly of like, we're just not going to be able to bridge that gap. It's too
Mhm.
much of a hook, too much of a like, um, all I can really, like, think of is, like, the intensity is overwhelming our capacity
Yeah.
a as a couple to really be able to bridge this gap together. So you break up, right? And then you sniff out this next person, you're like, "Oh, they're so different. Good. I didn't wanna date the same kind of person." And then you get to know them and you date them for a while, you're like, "Oh, wow, they're really, like, the same."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they're not all that different. They're different in some ways, but our dance is the same.
Mhm.
So, like, maybe it's not as intense.
Mhm.
Maybe it's not as fiery, meaning, like, remember the previous relationship was overwhelming our capacity. Maybe this feels more like it's within our capacity, but it's the same dance. I'm still texting you in order to get you to reply over and over again, and you're still ignoring like, there's this whole and then, I can't tell you how often I'll be meeting with someone in therapy and they're like, I really thought that this time it would be different, but I'm doing the same things or I'm experiencing the same things. And it's like, this really is a gift. the fact
Mhm,
that you're experiencing the same things. Like, please don't beat yourself up. This is
mhm.
so much about, to me, why we're here to begin with. We are
Right.
here to really basic fundamental lessons. And we do a lot of that learning in relationship with people. And if you don't get it right, master it the first time, it's going to be put right back in front of you again to give you another chance to master it. Or if you master step one the first time, you're going to get a chance to master step two, three, four, and five. Like
Yeah.
there's there's no escaping this work, in other words,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
and I think a lot of people kid themselves that, as you were mentioning that, "Oh, I'm never gonna get in a relationship like that," or they try to run from what they need to heal, and you really can't, right?
Mhm.
And it's gonna continue to show up in different ways. I think for me, it came to a point where I had to just sit there in stillness and realize that, okay, what's the common denominator here? It's me, right? So something needs to be healed. And that's when I really went on this inward journey and kind of came out on the other end more with a spiritual sense, which we talked about prior to recording. And yeah, that was kind of what allowed me to start healing and recognize a lot of those patterns. And it's a journey that never ends in my mind because you're going to be tested and uh, I think you're going to become aware of new things all the time because they're buried so deep.
So true. And I just want to sort of like go there a little bit um with the more inward like spiritual components of this. I mean, some of it I'll save the spiritual piece for the end, but like leading in that direction. You remember when I was talking about how like most of the time what people would say is you heal this in relationship and that
Mhm.
this is built in relationship, you heal it in relationship.
Mhm.
What we touched on the last episode is that, like, and this is what got me interested in somatic work, is this growing realization that you can heal this in relationship with yourself too. Let's not forget that our earliest relationship is really with ourselves.
Yeah.
So, once that became like that was a light bulb moment for me. And I think in our last episode, I was talking about how, like, when my mom passed away way too early, and then my husband passed away, almost 2 years ago. Um, in August, it'll be 2 years. What it left me sitting with a lot of was like, why are my attachment figures being taken from me? Like my primary attachment figures are all gone and, feeling very alone and sort of like, there has to be purpose in this. What's the
Mhm.
purpose in this? We were talking about purpose last time. And for me, like one of the conclusions that I came to was I truly feel like I was meant to learn, dive really deeply into and learn that we have the capacity in our relationship with ourselves to do this work inwardly and
Yeah.
that we don't have to always have the attachment figure to do this work with. And so with somatic work, you're essentially like bringing your inner parent on board in order to meet the needs, the what have been long-standing unmet needs of
Mhm.
the inner child bits of us. So like
Yeah.
if we have, an inner child that really feels as though they have to hustle for worth,
Mm.
and that when that part of us shows up, meaning like all day long, I'm feeling like I have to hustle for worth, this sense of anxiousness and this need to perform, right? That we can sit with that feeling in our body and really observe it lovingly with a lot of compassion and grace.
Mhm.
And develop our inner parent in response to that and do all kinds of beautiful things to heal that.
Yeah.
It, and so I won't get into too much of like about practices because there are so many different practices and ways that we can do that. We can do that in meditation. We can do that in very guided somatic practices. We can do that in journaling. We can literally do reparenting work between our inner parent and a part that is surfacing a part of us by dialoguing in written form. There's so many
Mhm.
things but I want to just emphasize that um, when you realize that you have all the tools inside of you and that really, once you develop them, they can never be taken away. There's
Yeah.
something so amazing about that.
Yeah.
It really started to feel like, that I was experiencing these things in part to learn them and then also to share them with people so that this knowledge can get out there more and more. And I know it's out there a lot. A lot of people are sharing it, but it's super powerful
Yeah.
and takes takes attachment work to me to a whole nother level. I wonder
Yeah.
your thoughts about that. Have you experimented with that?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's come up for me, and even when you were speaking, for me, at least, I can only speak to my experience. I did find more secure attachment just by being closer to faith and through the act of prayer with finding secure attachment with, whether you want to call it universe or oneness or God for me is how I look at it. And that's really brought me more peace because I think that's an attachment figure that's always there. And growing up
Mhm.
in faith, that's what something I was told to do, but not without much insight into it, because my parents were also dealing with their own trauma and attachment, so they didn't fully appreciate it. But as I've gone through this journey and I recognized how I was perhaps outsourcing that need for attachment, it was always there for me. And to your point, it's always inside of you, which, it's brought a new meaning for me when I hear the phrase man was made in the image of God. That brings a whole different,
Mhm.
profound meaning for me, and recognizing that attachment figure is truly inside of us and you can tap into it at any given moment.
Yeah, and that's again like the perfect segue to this other layer that I feel like is more new to me. Not new, like we were talking before we started recording that this is stuff that I've been really studying for years, but more like an intellectual curiosity.
Hmm.
And more recently, it's become like aha moments of, oh, this is how it's applied for me. And this is how, like, feeling it. It's a
Yeah.
whole other level. And what I mean is that, like, when I was describing how we can meet this need inwardly as inner parent, what I began to see is that when we're doing that, we're simply a portal. Like
Mm.
we are become this vessel through which like source energy can enter
Yeah.
us and do that work. So it's really not us. I mean, we are doing it, but we are doing it more by surrender than by anything else. So that's
Yes.
another reason why I don't like to get too hung up on the practices, because the practices can bring this energy up, almost like attachment, anxious attachment energy of like, oh, I got to chase that practice. I got to get it right. I got to do it. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? And if that's the way you're approaching a practice in your attempt to meet with an inner part that is hurting, you're
Hmm.
sort of like perpetuating the cycle.
Mm.
So I like to think of this more as like, how do I get out of the way? Like, yes, it is inner parent. I am turning my attention inwardly and I'm focusing on the sensations and the messages that need healing. But I'm also in the process of doing that, opening myself up to that coming in from, the source of that love, the source
Yeah.
of, the where secure attachment really comes from at its purest state, right? Just
Hmm.
pure love. Yeah, whatever you want to call that, whether it be the universe or God or source or, whatever framework works best. To me, it's just really cool to think, oh wow, like I don't have to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
have to have the technique down. I really just need to open myself up to that and let it in. And I
Hmm.
can do really powerful things with that in terms of visualization and imagining like this part that's in need of healing. Um, what age is that part? What age did that part come online? What was happening at that time? What wound was it holding for us? And then we can look at that's the wound that we're wanting source energy to pour love in on. So it's
Right.
almost like we're taking these wounds that are bubbling up like little bubbles, holding them in our hands and saying like, how can I pour so much into this, that it essentially is, like pops, like it essentially is no longer holding so much negative charge that it's allowed to be integrated and digested and
Mhm.
accommodated into the fullness of our being, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. I
spiritual.
think, what really came out for me there, I agree with you. I think often people get caught up in and there's guilt and shame that comes from not sticking to a practice, which to your point can lead to further anxiety. I think it's recognizing that the practice is there, it's not going anywhere. It's there for
Mhm,
you to use when you need it most, but don't try to get too attached to the idea of doing something because you think you need to do it. I think for me, I've used some of these practices that I alluded to earlier as a tool that's available to me when I need it most. And I really pull on it in those moments, but it's something that's always there. And I just know
mhm.
that. And then it kind of feels more secure. Excuse me. It's very much like a secure relationship, right? If your partner is going out or your caregiver is going out, they're going to come back
Yeah.
and you'll be fine, right? And you just have that trust and safety. And I look at those practices the same way that they're always there and I don't need to get too worked up about it. But there's also an element of surrender, knowing that, and it very similar to any secure attachment is knowing that you just do what you need to do and things will happen the way they're meant to, and you can't really control any
Mm.
one outcome. Sometimes we don't see the whole picture. We just have a very low level resolution of how we're seeing things. And you have to kind of wait for it to play out to really get a better understanding.
Yeah. And here's the paradox too, like what we were just describing is taking the attachment work outside of this, like, attachment figure, this other person in my life, outside of that domain and
Hmm.
into this, like, higher domain of my attachment relationship inwardly and also upwardly. Makes
Hmm.
it into the spiritual level, is that when we do that and develop enough security and reliability. So, like, remember we were talking about the moms and the babies and how so much of this was about attunement and responsiveness.
Hmm.
The mom's ability in these research studies to deeply attune to the needs of their child, and then also be responsive in effective ways. It's the same way inside. So it's like, how well can I attune to the sensations in my body? In other words, where I'm not bypassing or ignoring really key important information that my body's trying to send me. Because until you start doing this work, oftentimes we're human and we tend to be like plow through these sensations and really not even feel them. We get really detached from our bodies. And we're just like go, go, go. We're just pushing ourselves like this really masculine energy of like, no, I just got to keep throwing myself out there, right? Not realizing that we might be really flooding our nervous system, we're really out of touch and showing a lack of attunement with our body's needs, similar to how the dynamic in that mom child relationship was. So you can see how the inner parenting work is so
Hmm.
much about first attunement. What am I feeling? Can I notice that, like, I'm tired? Can I
Hmm.
note the sensations that, like, I feel uneasy right now? What's that about? And just having, like, this gentle curiosity about, like, wow, why is that showing up?
Hmm.
Can I sit with that? Can I get some information about that? And then being really responsive. So the responsive attunement being the first step, responsiveness being the next step, meaning like, now that I know that I'm tired or I am getting these vibes or I have this need inwardly that I just noticed. What
Hmm.
am I going to do about that? Like, can I not ignore that? Can I prioritize those needs? And this may be the first time in your life that your needs have ever been prioritized. Like, if you come from an attachment relationship in early life where those needs were not really attuned to, that means that you had some really basic needs that were never noticed enough to be put first. You know what I mean? So by us showing ourselves, oh, not only do I see you and feel you, I hear you and I'm going to take action for you. I'm
Right.
going to set that boundary. I'm going to say no, or I'm going to say yes to this thing that feels good, or I'm going to rest. And here's like a whole really hard layer. I know it might let this person down. And so sometimes putting yourself first means showing yourself that you matter that much that like your needs will sometimes come at the cost of disappointing someone. And
Hmm.
then learning how to regulate the fear around that. Like, because
Yeah.
what that we usually bring up is like, oh, but what if they leave me then? Or what if, but you're showing yourself, but I'm not going to leave you.
Hmm.
I'm here. And it has to start here first. If
Right.
I show myself that I'm never leaving you, that you, meaning will always be, I will always put my oxygen mask on first.
Correct.
Then when that security starts to develop from the inside, an earned secure attachment starts to be established. What I was saying about the paradox is that it starts to flow outwardly from us onto our relationships. So
Hmm.
this by taking the focus off of, "Oh, I need to make you happy though, and I need to make sure that you like me and that you approve of me." By taking the focus off of that and really putting it inward and bringing the spiritual component into it only amplifies this. Then what ends up happening is like, now I feel so solid that
Hmm.
I lean into connections really freely and openly because even if you leave me, I got me. So it's okay. I got me. So I don't have to fear whatever it is that you may choose to do, because if it signals danger to me, I got me and I'll leave. If
Yeah.
you signal to me that I'm not a priority to you or you're not going to treat me right, I will observe that sensation in my body and I'll respond and I'll set a boundary. In other words, I'm now free to lean into all these relationships that before I had to either like pull in or push away. And now I can just sort of like be in them.
Hmm.
I know how to count on myself,
Yeah.
AKA know that I'm held by something bigger. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that I take out of that is, and something I've started focusing on more lately, is this aspect of healing. And I think once we can heal ourselves and have that focus on ourselves, we show up as more secure people. And, I think a lot of people around us pick up on that energy.
Absolutely. And so, like, just taking it back full circle to that internal working model where it's about security within yourself, relationships and others. What we were just talking about is like starting from the self and noticing how that spills out and benefits relationships with others, relationships with the world. It now makes us more confident to explore. Picturing that little kid within that playroom with the toys, they can now feel good enough to go and pick up the toys and not like shrink down in their exploratory behavior. We're giving ourselves all of that, and it's sort of like filling upward into
Mhm.
those domains. So it's really powerful and amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And I think, yeah, this was not how I felt like the conversation would go, but I'm glad we ended up here because I think it's so important for people to recognize that ability to heal and find that secure attachment base. And like you said earlier, there's not to have this concept of, oh, there's no hope. I've just inherited this, or this is who I am, and this is how my relationships will go. But I think there's so much more work we can do. And that starts by looking inward and
Mhm.
uh, finding that secure attachment base within ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing me on to talk about all this. I could feel like I could talk about it forever. I know we're kind of like coming up against
Yeah,
time.
yeah, no, thank you for coming on here and having this conversation with me. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I appreciate everything you bring to the table. There's so much wisdom and insight there, so it's always a great learning experience for me. And I often find that there's so much value that listeners get out of these conversations. So absolutely, the gratitude's all on my end. So I appreciate that very much. And for listeners who, again, didn't listen to that first episode, what are some ways they can find you or get a hold of you, whether it's online or social media?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of links that I sent to you. I want to make sure you still
I
have them.
do.
Not I can read. It'd probably be easier than me listing
Yeah.
them off, but on Instagram, which is where we connect primarily, the Rooted Revolution. Um, and I have a separate grief account, which I think you may or may not
Yeah.
have. I'll make sure that you have
Yep.
that. Um, and I think included in that is my website and stuff like that. So I'll just make sure that you have all the current links and send those.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll put
The resolution.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
put that in the show notes, and I still have everything from last time, so I'll share that. But thank
Okay.
you again. This was great.
Absolutely. Take care of yourself. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you for checking out this episode with Natasha. Please leave a review or comments in the comments section. I always love hearing from you. And also subscribe to the podcast if you already haven't done so. It's the best way to support this podcast. Thank you, and until next week.